We're all set.
Hello, everyone. Really excited to be with you all today. Folks are rolling into this webinar right now, so we're going to give it just a second as folks flip into being attendees. We're really excited about this webinar here at the National League of Cities. We had about 400 folks register for this event, demonstrating just how important this compliance issue is, that there is some confusion around it, which is totally fine. That's why we're all here together today. My name is John D'Angelo. I am a strategic partnerships manager at the National League of Cities. We're 101 years old. We're very proud of that. You'll see a century of strengthening cities. That's what we do. Started as the local voice in Washington. We still do that. We are advocating on the Hill every day on issues near and dear to local leaders across the country. One of those issues that has popped up in our federal advocacy world is around ADA compliance. And funnily enough, this wonderful company, Streamline, that we'll be joined by today, will be joining the National League of Cities in Salt Lake City, November 20th through 22nd on the expo floor. So you'll definitely want to get your questions together from this webinar today, and then come join us at Salt Lake City with Streamline and our friends across the country, where we will have more than 3,000 locally elected officials join us. So with that, I'm going to pause, and it seems we're hitting critical mass on attendees. So thrilled to be welcoming Streamline as an executive partner of the National League of Cities. Our annual partnerships program is where the National League of Cities highlights the greatest and most critical solutions for cities on issues across the gambit. So if anyone on this call wants to talk more about the National League of Cities, about NLC's Strategic Partnerships Program, I'm here to do that. I'm sure Annalise will share my contact information afterwards. And Annalise, it's been such a pleasure to work with you and the team on this. Thank you so much for bringing this to my members and municipal markets at large. And I have the distinct pleasure of passing the mic over to my dear friend Mac Clemmens from Streamline. Thanks so much.
All right. Thank you. We're really honored to be here, and we have a great group joining us from all perspectives. Stuart Tubis, I will introduce first, and he is the litigator and expert when it comes to defending cities and municipalities against legal risk related to ADA. So he's represented the Marriott, he's represented some really large cities in the Bay Area. He's even fought appellate cases when it goes to court and has helped define the law. He's a Harvard-trained attorney and an MIT-trained computer scientist, and knows the technical and the practical when it comes to ADA. So we're delighted to have his perspective to figure out, what are we going to do about all of this, and especially PDFs. We're also joined today by the wonderful Annalise Spargo, who was introduced already. And she's great because she brings marketing, web design, and document experience to the conversation as well. And special guest today, Carter Tem. And Carter Tem is just connecting right now. Carter is an amazing Rain Man character, I would say. And Carter is one of the developers of NVDA. He has contributed code to basically the world's largest open source screen reader. And as a lifelong screen reader user, he has really redefined what is possible on the web and in documents. And he joins us today with very specific background on documents and how to make them more accessible. So Carter, can you hear us?
Yeah, it's great to be here. Thank you very much for the invite, and I look forward to this conversation here.
And awesome. And one thing we love about Carter is he involves his most opinionated folks when it comes to this. So he's been very involved in not only PDFs, but what are the best ways to facilitate accessibility? And he's had so many experiences with good technologies, bad technologies, things working on a practical level or not. So delighted to have his perspective as someone who relies on assistive technology.
Yeah, delighted to be here. I mean, it's one thing for us to say that the product works and that the product is great, but that doesn't really mean much of anything if we don't have people with all sorts of different impairments or daily users that are also saying that the product works for them. So, hope to be able to speak on that here shortly.
Yeah.
Thanks again.
Absolutely. Yeah, very good. So, yep, what works, what doesn't? That's the conversation today. What can we rely on and how do we go? So, today we're going to cover three major areas. One, we're going to cover why it's important. Many of you here are already experts in accessibility, and I think it would be great by a show of hands. How many of you would consider yourselves accessibility experts? Like you have been after this problem for a long time and you want to get the latest and greatest information. Okay, not as many hands as I thought. How many of you are like, okay, we think we're pretty aware of this, but we feel like we've got a lot to learn? All right, now we're talking. Okay, about 100 of you. And then how many of you would say, this is new, this is confusing, I'm not sure if I like it? How many of you fall in that category? Okay. Okay, very good. So yeah, I think it's going to be really interesting. So we're going to talk about why it's important. We're going to talk about the what, the legal landscape. What are the viable options for PDFs? And how do we make sure that we get all the bases covered? And then the last part is how. And we're going to talk about some real world cases. We've got Gordon from a city in Massachusetts. We've got friends from all over, and we're going to open this up for you to weigh in and to provide your perspective as well. So with that, we're going to kick it off and get started. So for those of you who did bravely raise your hand, say, I'm kind of new to this, we want to take a step back and ask, what comes to mind when you hear the word accessibility? And in chat, feel free to jump in on this. What comes to mind? Access, LaRonda says. Yes. Variable communication, April points out. I love that. Equality, Jessica says. Karen points out, being able to hear a document you can't read. Absolutely. There's so many associations we have, but as we think about it, how does somebody with a disability read about an evacuation notice or a service outage? How do they report an issue with a playground using a form? How do they request a facility rental or find a PDF about starting service? How do they understand a rate table in your annual report or read your most recent board packet? All of these things are so important. And they're important for so many reasons. Social responsibility, good business. I mean, many of you probably are thinking about search engine optimization or generative intelligence optimization. And it's really important that if you want to, combat maybe rumors or reputation issues in your community, that you can be found. And one of the key ways to do that is to make sure that the visually impaired user, also known as a search engine, can index your site. And of course, the legal parts, which we'll get into. But as a quiz question, what percentage of the population has a physical or mental disability that might affect their ability to get information off your site? Anyone want to take a guess in chat? Miranda says 60%. It's everywhere for Miranda. Thomas, far more conservative, 12%. Carly and Edwin, more 30 to 40. Ken's up to 50. Okay, guesses are coming in all over the place. Drum roll, Jeopardy belt, 15 to 20% of the population. So it's actually a higher number than you might think, because there's degrees. If you ever had to do this with your phone, try to read something because the font's too small, that is an example of a disability. So many dimensions to that. All right. So I'm going to bring Stuart on to comment on some of this as we walk through it, but we want to quickly review the legal landscape because there are so many different laws. You've got the foundation, which is ADA compliance, and that is all about equal rights, right? This was passed in 1990. And it's interesting because there's two pathways to enforcement. The government can enforce, as the DOJ has discussed, but it also provides private party remedy, if I'm saying that right, Stuart, that allows folks to repair things on their own, or to, ask for a cause of action to correct an issue under Title II or Title III. We also have the Department of Justice, who has now made very specific regulations on what this all means technically. And they expanded the scope from just websites to all kinds of electronic media, including PDFs and documents. You've got Section 508 of the U.S. Rehabilitation Act, which kind of connects the ADA to local government and access to technology. Then you've got state laws. Some of you are from Colorado, dealing with HB 211110, maybe UNRU Act in California. And then at the very top of all of this, you have the WCAG standards, the WCAG 2.1 AA standards. And what a mouthful, right? But what's great about these standards is that they are universal, they're international, and they do make sense. We can test against them. And if there's one takeaway from this slide that I want you to know, it's that when you're WCAG compliant, you do meet all of these other laws, essentially. So if there's one thing you focus on, it would be that, because that can ensure your compliance. And so if we take a step back, the DOJ was really poured kind of gasoline on the ADA fire, in the sense that people got very worried. And what that DOJ regulation stated is that it applies to all digital content. And this just takes those WCAG standards and applies them to documents, applies them to digital signage, applies them in so many different directions. And for you as cities, if you have a population over 50,000, and just by show of hands, how many of you fall into that category? You've got your April deadline. Okay, Gordon's raising his hand from Quincy, Massachusetts. Okay, how many of you fall in the other category? Just a handful. You'll all be joining next year. Yeah, okay. Great. Okay, so the folks on the call today here are largely, you've got a deadline in less than 6 months, so you're getting ready to focus on that. Awesome. All right, and I think we're not going to talk extensively about what those standards are. There's a lot to cover, but you can remember it through the acronym POUR, P-O-U-R, and that's perceivable, making sure that folks can understand it. Operable, meaning that it can be navigated from a keyboard. I know we worked with folks who are quadriplegic, and I remember working with a man who could navigate the internet very well using a stick in his mouth. It was incredible. Understandable, making sure that there's descriptive titles, consistent layout and languages, and robust, meaning that it'll work with current and future technologies. So awesome. And yeah, hats off to those of you like Karen who still have a year plus to figure this out and are already getting an early start. For those of you who may not know kind of the history of how this got going, there's a really interesting history in Florida where Juan Carlos Gil, who is blind, actually filed nearly 200 lawsuits across the state. And it was interesting because we actually got our hands on one of these letters, and he had basically said, even though I don't live in this part of the state, I might, and I would like to have all of the budgets remediated. And budgets, include tables, and many of you know those are really tricky, especially back in 2016 when he was sending these letters. And it definitely got people's attention. And this request for accommodation soon turned into a demand for money. And, this is something that comes up. So Stuart, can you tell us a little bit about what is the request for accommodation process? What are we seeing here with what's happened back in Florida, and how is that today?
Yeah, sure. And thanks for the introduction, Mac. I'm a ADA compliance and defense attorney. I'm a partner here at Jeffer Mangels, Butler and Mitchell. And, I deal with these types of cases and claims every day. And the ADA really kicked this all off when it was passed decades ago, and it was written in a unique way where instead of having a public agency enforce the law, kind of like we do with the health department that comes out and inspects restaurants, and we'll give them a ticket if they're out of compliance. The ADA was written so that individual plaintiffs, ordinary citizens, can enforce the law by bringing litigation. They can file a lawsuit, or they can make a complaint to the Department of Justice, which has the authority to enforce the law. And so what we've seen since then is a really large and growing body of litigation where, in particular, a lot of plaintiffs will go out testing websites, testing facilities for ADA compliance, and they'll send a letter like this sometimes, and sometimes they'll just file a lawsuit without a letter warning. There's no requirement under the ADA that they send a letter like this first. So oftentimes they'll just file a lawsuit and they'll sue for usually for injunctive relief, which is a court order to make the website compliant, as well as attorney's fees and filing costs, which can be very high and certainly can grow and grow as the case goes on.
And then in terms of enforcement, Stuart, like what are you seeing in terms of the trends?
Yeah. So yeah, this table is interesting. This shows that really the vast majority of ADA lawsuits are brought by a specific set of plaintiffs and firms. There are really some law firms out there that specialize in this area of law, and they've filed hundreds or thousands of different lawsuits, each basically, alleging some variation of the same thing, that their client visited a website, it was not ADA compliant when it should have been, and they sue for injunctive relief, attorney's fees, and in some states like California, they can obtain statutory damages too. In California, for example, it's $4,000 per occurrence for statutory damages.
So that's like one PDF, like not being tagged. And do they get that right away?
That would be like each instance that they tried to use the website and couldn't. And there is a duty to mitigate your damages in California, so it's not as if they can visit the website 1,000 times and claim those
Yeah.
statutory damages each time. But they often do claim multiple statutory damages, and really, the point is that there are these plaintiffs out there that are really looking for these lawsuits. So, in addition to just ordinary citizens who are trying to use the services, there are certainly these career serial plaintiffs that are make it their job, really their mission to enforce the law.
Yeah. And Jill Yacht is asking, she's a public library. Well, actually, let me start with Roger's question first, that cities have many public-facing systems and portals, including permitting, PRA request systems, CRM. Do the ADA requirements apply to all public-facing apps or only the main website and mobile app?
Yeah, sure. So, if it's a good or service that's offered to the public, then it should be compliant and accessible. If it's something used internally only, that only, employees and staff are going to look at, then, we're not talking about the same set of requirements. But no, it's not just the main website. It's, also, you know, side websites or other services offered online, forms, for example, surveys, that sort of thing.
Mm-hmm. Jill Yacht's asking, she's a public library where her board packets, policies, documents are all PDFs. She plans to make pages like HTML pages where it makes sense. and do packets moving forward to be compliant. But what about past packets? Does she need to make those compliant as well?
Yeah, sure. So, there is a lower requirement for some of these historical documents, archived, documents, but in general, you should not rely on this idea that older material is grandfathered in. It's honestly one of the biggest myths I find in the ADA world that, existing material or old material is all grandfathered in, and so there's no real subject to ADA
Mhm.
compliance requirement.
Hmm. Yeah, because right, folks who refer to the archive provision of the DOJ, you know, as a way to put things in a dedicated section. But you're saying that's like not something folks should rely on. Is that true in all states or just California and Colorado with their statutory damages?
No, that's true of all states. So we're talking about Department of Justice, so that'd be the
Hmm.
federal level.
Okay. Okay, awesome. To keep focused, I'm going to move us into the definition. Like, what does document accessibility actually mean? So, leading us this section is Annalise. Annalise, I hand it to you.
Yeah, thanks, Mac. So yeah, this is a great question. I think I was just at the California League of Cities conference a couple weeks ago, actually, talking about this, and I had so many cities asking me, when you say accessible document, what does that mean? Do I need to provide Braille on my document or something like that? And so I wanted to spend a second breaking that down. So when we're talking about accessible documents, what we really mean is that anyone, including anyone using an assistive technology, can read and navigate a file effectively. To make that possible, a document has to have a couple key things. So similar to what we were talking about previously with the WCAG guidelines, essentially those WCAG 2.1 AA guidelines are pointing to what will make a PDF document or a digital document accessible to a screen reader. So first, it has to be properly tagged, so a screen reader can understand it. That's text, headings, and reading order. And then there needs to be alternative text as well for any images, charts. Otherwise, someone using a screen reader just hears like graphic, 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 which is not super helpful, right? If you're trying to read a chart or a graphic of a service area or boundary or something along those lines. And then third, the content must be like real selectable text, not just scanned images of a page, because the screen reader can't interpret that. So we know there's a ton of maps, a ton of systems and things like that that you all use at the city level. And those just scanned images of a page aren't interpretable by a screen reader. And then next, there should be a logical structure. So headings, lists, tables, anything like that must be marked up so users can jump around the document easily. Again, without those specific headings, lists, and tables, it makes it really challenging for anyone using assistive technology to navigate that document. And then we also need enough color contrast on the document as well. So you can't really rely on color alone to convey meaning. So making sure that everything is kind of written out in text. And then finally, every file includes document properties like title, language, and metadata, so it's readable across the assistive technologies. And those all have to be present as well. So altogether, these elements like ensure that everyone, regardless of how they access information, can engage with the public documents. And so I'd like to actually hand it off to Carter to give us a brief demonstration using a screen reader of like what it's like to navigate a PDF document using screen reader technology, and do a demo for us so we can all see that experience. I'll tap you in, Carter.
Hey there, everyone. All right. So I have quite a few different PDF documents. I'm going to choose one completely at random. So this is a PDF document that I'm pulling from a student handbook, and it gives, information about uh, times and what the expectations are from the semester. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and my screen reader. I'm using the NVDA screen reader here. Of course, it's going to be pretty similar depending on which screen reader you're using.
And then Carter, will you
Yeah.
enable the voiceover so we can hear what you're hearing?
Yes, yes, most definitely.
I've always been amazed. Carter caught spelling errors on a website we were reviewing together. We misspelled accessibility, and he could hear the difference at 600 words per minute. So I've always been very impressed with his abilities. And then Carter, we're not seeing your screen shared yet.
I had,
There
there
you
we
go.
go.
Should be coming up pretty quickly. Sorry about that.
Perfect.
Usually takes a second. Yeah, so what you'll hear is that's my screen reader. Now, it's a little bit quick. A lot of people who use screen readers are going to listen to it at an increased rate, and they do that. And this is kind of an important accessibility consideration that I think a lot of the time goes untalked about. But visually, you can look at the screen. Yeah, you'll hear messages being read here and there. Visually, you can look at the screen, left to right, top to bottom. You can kind of skim that content. You can find certain pieces of information that like stick out to you and look at certain words. As a screen reader user, you really can't do that. So a lot of people are going to learn to ingest the content quickly, and I'll get to that in just a second, why that's important, why that matters here. But so when we're structurally navigating a PDF document, we're going to be viewing the document based on the order that things are written in code. So I'm gonna just go ahead and jump to this piece here. So again, this is a student handbook I downloaded randomly from a university's website. And I'm going to turn down the speech rate so you can kind of understand what's going on here. So just to kind of level set.
Toolbars hidden. Region.
So toolbars hidden.
11:28 a.m.
Just announce
Received
the time.
a question. Asked at 11:27.
We received a question. Awesome.
Page 1, page 2, landmark heading, level 3, explanation of terms and subterms due to the Panola adjusted the terminology of our terms and subterms. The following nomenclature will now be used. Fall terms. Fall A term equals 16-week fall.
So what you're looking at here is a pretty inaccessible PDF, and it's inaccessible because you'll see that there's terms here. It's kind of laid out as a table, but what I'm hearing is just the text of that content. So I'm forced to kind of make an assumption about what relationship each of these have to one another.
M term equals when analyze Sparta spring. C term equals second 8-week flex term sprint from John Santos to everyone. Week summer. B term equals summer I-5 weeks summer. C term equals summer 2-5 weeks example of fall.
So I won't keep going through that over and
Received
over, but that kind of gives you an idea. Now, what I do when I want to jump from one section to the other, right? Because you can keep pressing the down arrow. Again, there's really no mouse use when it comes to a screen reader. I can keep pressing the down arrow key. But that takes a really long time. So we rely on usually headings to jump between different sections of that document.
Fall 2025 terms heading fall A term, page 5 landmark fall B term, page 6.
And so a lot of documents that you will discover do not have these headings that you can jump between sections. They don't have tables marked up properly, as Annalise was kind of talking about. They don't have images.
Page 12 landmark unlabeled graphic.
Described. You just heard that there. Unlabeled graphic. I have no idea what that is. That could be a decoration, or it could be a graph or a diagram that's trying to convey some really important piece of content that I'm just entirely missing out on. So I could keep going through a PDF document. I'm gonna hand it back over to Mac though, because if I kept going over PDF document and all the different accessibility issues, we would be here all day. So that's kind of an overview. And I encourage you on your own documents to kind of take a look at that. Like, do we have headings that are marked up properly? Do our images actually have labels describing what they are and the important information? Little things like that. There's the accessibility checker that you can use in Adobe if you have access to that. That's really helpful for pointing out some of the low-hanging fruit. With that having been said, Mac, take it away.
All right. Carter, you're incredible. I just how you're even keeping track of the Zoom meeting and all the questions being asked just amazes me. But also to witness you not being able to know these little decorative ligatures on the ends of the title, that's just a practical example. But we've heard more, like in Colorado, where a woman had to read a wildfire evacuation notice one letter at a time because of the way it was scanned and the way it was capitalized. So there's so many nuances that affect your experience, and the fact that you can listen at that speed and say we can't even understand what it is incredible. So thank you for sharing that experience with us. And
anytime.
We're going to pick your brain. I see questions in here about what are good screen readers. It's great discussion in chat. So we'll jump in on that just a minute. Thank you again, Carter. So, you can technically make PDFs accessible, but it's expensive and it's fragile at scale. So I want to welcome Gordon Jones from the city of Quincy, Massachusetts. And Gordon, tell us your experience with this. And I'll welcome others joining us today to share how were you dealing with this? How are you dealing with this?
It's a daunting task, I'll be honest with you. I am the only person that runs the website for the city of Quincy, and we have roughly 5,000 documents. Some are as easy as one page, some almost 1,000 pages. Basically, where we started was we sought help from the state, who was doing some training as to how to remediate a PDF manual. I sat through one class, and it was about an hour. The instructor remediated one page in an hour. And then I sat down and I looked and I went, wow, a 400-page document is going to take me a month. And it's almost impossible to do in-house, especially with one person. And then once you do get one, it works some, but it's not always 100%. It's very, very difficult to get a standard PDF to be perfect.
And then it's interesting. Roger's chiming in on chat saying we've been told it's challenging, impossible to be 100% compliant, but 80 to 90% is probably good enough. What does that mean? What 20% doesn't matter? That's a great question. And Carter or Stuart, chime in on this. What's reasonable, and what does Gordon have to achieve? What's the success threshold?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I'll speak in on the technical aspect, and then I'll let Stuart pop in the legal aspect. There's usually a little bit of kind of disconnect from the two, so I think it's important that you hear from both angles. From the technical perspective, what we're really focused on is, does a user get the same level of detail and information from the document, irrespective of what assistive technology they happen to be using? So I think probably the biggest issue that I encounter in PDF documents, number one, if your PDF document is scanned in, it's a picture, or it doesn't actually have text, it's just a picture of text. Every single time that PDF document is automatically going to be inaccessible and non-compliant. So anything the second you look at a PDF document and it's just a scanned image, that should be a red flag immediately. The second thing to that is PDF documents that have images of graphs. We talked about this a little bit a couple minutes ago, but images of graphs, diagrams, charts, anything like that, you always want to make sure that those are labeled somehow so that users are able to understand the level of detail in that information. In Adobe, you can right-click an image, and then there's an edit alternative text option that you can use to actually add that. And you want to say, list out the data points, provide a summary, with a detailed summary of the information there. That's number two. Number three would probably be no structure. So there was a really good question asked in the chats of, okay, when we have headings here, is that just really bold text? Do we have to mark those up some way? The answer is yes. So headings can actually be added and tagged in Adobe itself. There are plenty of guides on how to do this online, but most of the time what people do is they use just bold text to serve as a heading itself, or they'll do the other way around, right? Where they love the style that a level 1 heading has because it stands out and it's very prominent. And so then they'll use that as a means of adding that visual. I call it eye candy. You want to make sure that your headings are actually properly marked up as headings using that tag manager. Those are really the most common issues we see. There's plenty of other stuff too. If your document is, we had a good question about multilingual support. If your document does use multiple languages, you have to mark up that text as using a different language. Otherwise, a screen reader user is not going to get the same level of detail and it's not going to announce correctly. The one thing, other thing I'll add before I will throw it back to Stuart is when we're talking images in PDFs, a lot of the time people say, oh man, this is a pain. You know, I have to take all the text out of this image and then I have to write it down in the document. What people fail to realize is you're also really increasing the ability for a search engine or generative AI tools to find your content. They're not able to look at the images and pull out the text in those. What they have to do is they have to go by just the plain text in the same way that a screen reader will. There's a lot of different solutions, optical character recognition, AI tools, and things like that that can help you pull the text out of an image. But yeah, those happen to be like the top 3 things. Stuart, what have you been noticing on the legal side?
Yeah, sure. I think the question was basically about, what should be done for smaller entities, these requirements being really overwhelming. And really, there's not an exception here under the law for smaller entities. It can seem a little overwhelming at first, but even small entities, very small special districts or cities do need to comply with these ADA requirements. The deadline is pushed out a little bit further for smaller entities, but you've really got to make the whole thing, anything that you provide online compliant. Sometimes I consider myself a little bit like the dentist. People will give me a call when there's a problem and there's a lawsuit filed, and it'd be a little bit like asking whether I need to brush all of my teeth or whether I can just brush most of them. So you want to cover the whole thing. That said, look, if realistically you're resource constrained here, I would start with the most important and the most used digital content first and prioritize what receives the most traffic and attention by constituents, and then try to get to everything else after that.
Absolutely. So with that being said, we're going to briefly cover the 6 things that you can do, because you probably came here, looking not only to hear about all of the difficulties of being accessible, but what you could do today in the leadership role that you are to affect change for your city. And so we put together 6 things that you can do to take this on and to have forward motion. I'm going to briefly cover this, and then I want to open up for Q&A and dig more into how is this problem being solved now. And I'm going to tap Gordon and any of you who are willing to speak on this as well to get that perspective. So these 6 steps. The first is to designate an accessibility officer. You'd be amazed in the absence of this how much confusion and ball dropping there can be. But just as you have a process for freedom of information or public request or sunshine laws, you want to have the same process in place for accessibility. Likewise, you want to make sure that you approve an accessibility statement on your website, or at least you post one up. Many organizations actually get it formally approved, some do not. But Stuart has written one for us, and he, instead of having to have your general counsel spin their wheels, you can start with a great draft, one that works in all 50 states that Stuart has created and refined over time. And you can post it on your website, and it can have things like how to report an issue, how to fix a problem. This is so important. So if you don't have one already, make sure to have one and check out the full example page. Also, scanning and assessing your current status. Many people do not know the state of their accessibility, even how many PDFs they have. And PDFs are just one kind of document too. We're kind of starting there, but this applies to all documents, which are accessible, which are not, and how do you check? So there are free accessibility checkers out there, and there's also Adobe Acrobat. But the big problem is that Adobe scans for accessibility, and it's nice. It's its own, version of accessibility, but it doesn't align to WCAG. And this has been a common frustration with Adobe, is that it performs an accessibility scan, but not the one that would be valuable to your organization under Title II. So if you have PAC 2024, or maybe you're using the beta 2026, that is free. You can use it, download it. Abby Fine Reader, Common Look, they check for all of the WCAG things that you can test for practically, but Adobe does not. So this is just a big important note when it comes to that. There are tools out there that will provide accessibility reports. They'll scan through your website and pick this up. And so these are great. They can save you a lot of time. And you want to figure out then, fourth, once you've kind of scanned and understand where you are, the fourth is to identify the compliance route that works for your agencies. There are three that we see, and you don't have to choose just one, but the big one is do it yourself. So Gordon, you did the do it yourself, right? I mean, that you went to trainings and stuff.
Yes, we attempted to, yes.
Okay, we attempted to. Okay, how many of you, by a show of hands, are doing it yourself currently? You have staff, you've got a team. Okay, yeah. And how do you manage, getting that agenda packet up on time, or the board packet out? Like, is it part of the workflow? What happens when there's last minute changes? There are some great resources out there for do it yourself. And whether that's using like from Word to Acrobat to checking with another tool, it just can be frustrating. We made sure, because you've got to deal with the tagging, the reading order, the alternative text. We tapped Sean Jordison. He's the accessibility guy on YouTube, and he'll certainly be on future webinars with us as well. He's awesome. He made 2 videos that we share with you today on how to make a simple agenda fully compliant from start to finish, and how to make a more complex document more compliant. And he takes it all the way through and tests it against the Common Look reader. And it's great. You just get a cup of coffee and get through it. But the problem is on some of these that has come up, and Gordon had pointed this out, and I think someone else had pointed this out in chat. It was like, damn tables, they're so hard to get done. And that's true. So everything's nice until you get the architectural packet that's supposed to go in your board packet, and then you're trying to figure out what to do there. The second option that we see people doing is third-party manual services. So whether you've got a contract, sometimes you can buy it through like a state agency. We've seen like Colorado as a state, the State Internet Portal Authority contracted with Common Look. And the issue there is high cost and the slow turnaround. So this actually came up in California, where we were indemnifying a district, a small, like a tiny little district up in the foothills. And they had a 111-page board packet. They posted it on their site in 72 hours before the meeting. And then immediately somebody in the community said, I need this in an accessible format. This was somebody who had had a history of, grievances against the district. And they said, well, I need this in an accessible format. So we rushed to get it to them in 24 hours, did 111 pages, spent $9 a page to do that, tapped, the accessibility guy, Sean Jordison. He got it back, and they still file an action against the district, the county, and the LAFCO stewards dealing with this. And it was on the basis that they didn't have as much time as everybody else to review it. So that came up as just like an eye opener that is still a challenge with manual remediation. So it's the sustainability question and the quality. If you are looking for those third-party manual vendors, you obviously want to look for that proven track record, quality assurance. If it is a secure or confidential document, it's not so applicable in the public sector, but if you need that, you want to make sure that's handled appropriately and good pricing, ongoing relationship. Ideally, like we found, it's nice to just get a rate per page, so you just know in advance and you don't have to go through the quoting process. And then the third route is a newer route that's emerged this year on automated or AI-assisted software. So we've seen tools that are like you download to your computer, or even some of them are cloud-based, where you go through the document and it speeds up the remediation process. It can be quite a pretty good time savings. Then we have solutions like Doc Access that are completely kind of cloud-based and automatic, and just take your documents as they are and perform remediation by transforming them into HTML, and then serving it within a couple of minutes on your site, kind of interrupting the user's standard download flow, and then layering things like IRA for live assistance. And that's why we're here. I've worked on that product personally, and that kind of led to the league reaching out to us to facilitate this conversation. So just want to disclose that. And that is kind of has the benefit of scalability and speed. It was very much inspired by that lawsuit to say never again should folks have to deal with this. And then there's really specific challenges there around hallucination, around accuracy, but also opportunities working with Carter and others to figure out how do we make it better. So a lot to consider there. And I think the question on any software tool is like, does it produce truly accessible and accurate output? If the tables have cells that are in the wrong spot, if it's hallucinating and saying this is a map of Manhattan when it's a fire escape map, it needs to be appropriate, and it needs to be really battle tested and with public sector compliance in mind. And does it combine AI speed but with human QA? Is there human in the loop? I think where Accessibility and other kind of plugins and overlays kind of went wrong. Well, actually, Carter, I'll let you speak to that. Like there's been a lot of software in the past, and I knew this came up. Like Nobility had a statement on this. National Federation of Blind banned Accessibility from their conference. What about overlays? What about technology?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's been a huge conversation that we've had in the accessibility community for the past over 5 years. Accessibility, a really popular, common one, just had to settle for $1 million at the Department of Justice back in January of this year. And so there's been a lot of worry, right? That it's like accessibility is such a subjective experience, and it really depends on the humans that are reading it. So inherently, you can't have a piece of software that just makes everything work perfectly out of the box, or you couldn't, at least until generative artificial intelligence came on the scene, and a lot of human in the loop existed to kind of refine it. So my primary function with this product is simply, and I take people with different impairments from pretty much everywhere. We had a blind accountant talking about hundreds of thousands of PDFs that he uses for in tax season. We have people who are training individuals with all sorts of disabilities, and people that he's trained kind of take a look at these different documents. You can actually look, if you're curious about overlays being the products that are purporting to fix all accessibility issues on a website immediately. You can look at, it's called the overlay fact sheet. It kind of outlines the problem with that in more detail. But what we propose is the technology does the vast majority of the heavy lifting. And then the humans on the other side verify that the technology is doing what it's supposed to be.
Yeah, awesome.
I'll just chime in quickly from a legal perspective. I'll say do not rely on these very cheap, simple overlay software solutions to fix your website. You know, if you're just figuring out how to solve this problem and you start Googling website compliance, you'll get a lot of ads for products like Accessibility and AudioEye and others that, you know, purport to make a whole website accessible right away for like $30 a month. And I just can't tell you how many lawsuits I've handled by clients who relied on those simple, inexpensive solutions that totally let them down. It does not make a website compliant. So just a word of caution there.
Yeah, and I will say too, I'm sure you've seen this, Stuart, quite a bit. They kind of become a target, right? We'll have serial complainants going and looking specifically at websites that use these types of overlay products, and then they'll specifically try to sue based on the fact that they're using that product and the issues that have come up in the past. So I really think that's a takeaway. Something to just think about is especially as this ADA Title II, the 2026 and 2027 deadlines are coming closer, you're going to have a lot of people probably reaching out and saying, hey, we will get rid of this problem for you once and for all. Pay us $50 a month.
Yep.
Just view those things with a lot of speculation because there is no quick, immediate fix for accessibility.
Yeah.
Yep.
And Stuart, you wrote a great article on your blog, and yeah, this is kind of one of the beacons of light in the community, a really respected blog. And you and three of your partners all co-signed on this article about, you know, where this is going. And so you've long stood against overlays, but you talked about, you know, with doc access and so the AI native tools, like where the line is and like how it needs to be crossed, and the point that had been controversial on like, hey, if you're using a tool like doc access, do you have to actually remediate the original PDF? And some folks had taken the position yes, but you had kind of a more nuanced perspective where you're like, actually, if it can do all of the things, then you don't have to. You know, this would at least provide an acceptable alternative.
Yeah, that's right. I've been actually really impressed with doc access and what it's able to do with PDFs. And I really sat down and dug into the law on this and whether it would meet the requirements of the ADA and Subpart H. And I kind of spell it out in this article. So if you're interested in this issue, check it out. But yeah, ultimately, I think there's um, a lot of authority within the law to defend use of something like doc access.
Well, Carter, would you prefer a fully remediated PDF or an HTML page?
Always an HTML page, simply because there are just so many more options for customization. We talked about this with the accessibility guy quite a bit. I've asked many of the people that I work with every day that are blind, visually impaired, have dexterity impairments, pretty much everything under the sun. And people say that the web is just so common and people know how to navigate web pages at this point. Documents can be opened in so many different readers that have limited support with the assistive technologies that people are using. So it's so much easier to just navigate with HTML content. And no matter what solution you choose to go with, the best way to actually provide accessible alternatives is to simply make your content available as an HTML-based web page.
Mm.
And that's not just me talking. I mean, you can ask pretty much anywhere online and you'll kind of see the same consensus.
Yeah, that was kind of the thinking too. So originally, like the AI solution around doc access was to actually make accessible PDFs, and then that, based on input from the disability community, changed course to provide accessible HTML, and then it came with the benefit of becoming mobile responsive, translatable, because you can't read a PDF on a phone. I mean, you just really can't. You've got to turn it sideways, you got to pinch and swipe. But if you don't have reading glasses or whatever else, it's really not mobile responsive. And so that's really one of the big barriers that goes away when you have kind of a companion HTML transcript view. But in those three approaches, you've got kind of a do-it-yourself model, you've got a third-party model, and you have software, and there are strengths and weaknesses, challenges to each. Two other things just to keep in the back of your mind. One is to evaluate the accessibility, indemnity, or insurance. So like, what assurances is the product having? I know like this is one Stuart and his colleagues excel at, is just sticking it on the vendor. If somebody builds you a building and they forget the wheelchair ramp, you haul their butt back and you make them add it. Well, why is that any different for technology? If you have a vendor who's taking care of your PDF files and there's an issue, are they defending you in court? I think that was the big issue with the overlays that people bought, is they provided no assurance when they actually got sued. And so that's a difference there. And then, if you are a larger city, third-party ADA audits can provide independent assurance. I know we do that as we build software and other things we work with Level Access, but it is a considerable investment. So, this is a journey, not a one-time project. There's things that we're going to be watching for in the future, what's happening with the technologies, what's happening with liability, what's happening with transparency. The saddest thing I've seen is this digital book burning that's happening, where people say, well, I know how to be compliant. We'll just get rid of every historical document, everything that shows, how we came to be, that would build public trust. In a time where democracy is so important and needs leadership and needs communication, is not the time where we make accessibility the enemy of transparency. So with that, I want to open it up to questions. There is so many good questions flying through the chat. I'm trying to keep up. But many of you had offered some in advance, so I want to knock through these quickly, and then we'll stay on. I think we're scheduled to end at noon, but we'll stay on for anybody who has additional questions until all the questions are answered, or until we run out of time. So just jumping in, Stuart already addressed, like, can we just have our older documents listed on an archive section, then post compliant docs as usual? I think technically you can, but Stuart advises against that for all the practical reasons that he mentioned, because anybody can still request, a need for remediated copy, so forth. Is that fair, Stuart, in terms of that response?
Yeah, that's fair. And, there are a set of pretty specific requirements for what would actually constitute archived content like that. And so, generally I advise that if you can make the content accessible, then you should.
Now, do all attachments in an agenda need to be compliant if they're from a third party? What strategy do you use for compliance? If they aren't compliant, do you leave them off or only attach compliant documents? I give this to Annalise and Gordon, or actually Gordon, first Annalise, then Gordon. So Annalise, is that true? And then Gordon, how do you deal with this? Because you literally had a 1,000-page document on your site, I saw.
I actually think Gordon has a better perspective on this. I'd love his perspective first.
Yeah. When you look at a document like that, we have specific documents, and in the state of Massachusetts, if it's, at a public meeting, if that's presented, we have an itinerary or an agenda. We also have an accompanying PowerPoint. All of that needs to be put into the public record. And your agendas are only kept for a very short period of time, but your minutes need to be kept indefinitely. And in most municipalities around here, you have the option of walking in and having a kiosk in your main, lobby of your facility where you can pull up the minutes, but most people designate their website as your only means of conveyance to the public. So it's really important that everything in the document is accessible. For me personally, that's been one of the biggest tasks, is going through a document and saying, okay, well, these pages look like they're screen reader capable. And we've always in the past kind of designated, as long as it worked and it was a PDF and you could highlight it, that was okay. And in the past, our CMS providers that we're no longer with have told us that, yeah, you're okay. And that's one thing that I kind of wanted to point out is this has always been almost like the Wild West, is whoever you talk to for help would always make up rules as what they interpreted the rules as. So getting somebody who knows the rules and is a expert in it is key. That's like the number one thing that you're going to want to do. And then you have to go through every single document that you have, really. And that's what I've done, and say, okay, well, these are okay. This needs to be remediated. And again, that fell into, this is physically impossible for one person to do. And, luckily there are tools out there that will allow you to do this, and they are accurate, which is, it's just physically impossible to go through. When you have a 1,000-page plan on a building, you can't remediate blueprints. But there are ways to make it that way. And just having an assistant like this, it's just an invaluable tool.
Yeah, awesome. And like just a little look at that, like how kind of the technology is evolving, just some of the things that have come up, like kind of sort of the old way of doing things, like kind of earlier versions of the technology would take, something like a big stacked graph and it would just make a giant alt tag. It's really not ideal, as Carter would attest. He gave a lot of feedback. Now it's kind of a best practice that we're trying to do is to make sure that we provide companion source tables, even if they're not, provided, that we extrapolate one using some of the machine learning. Even with pie graphs, we will look at the shape of the pie graph, take the percentages, and then build a table. So tables are just gold, and then you can use the alt tag to really convey the meaning of the document. And I think the same is true for flowcharts. They were kind of thought to be sort of impossible to transcribe, org charts. But we're now finding that you can actually use unordered lists and go ahead and create all the ARIA labels and jump links to where you can even explain a flow chart. And this is possible with AI. It would not really be possible for a human to do it. And I know the AI can even document its reasoning on like why it made the decision that it makes, so that those pieces can come together. And the other challenge too is like with table of contents. I think people that are new to kind of using like machine learning or whatever, if you kind of process it one page at a time, or even you put it to ChatGPT, for Carter, he relies on that heading structure. And this is a real report where San Mateo County Mosquito and Vector Control District is like the heading 1, and the notes to basic financial statements is the 2, and then for the year ended is the 3. Just if you sort of offered it to somebody, sort of a vanilla way to translate it, but it really makes for a terrible table of contents because that's just the style that it repeats the heading of the organization. But the real title of this is actually notes to basic financial statements. So, creating a system that can actually bring out the thing that matters about this page and include that into the table of contents is like kind of on that good to great pathway that we strive for, is just like, how do you really make things totally usable and not just grab what's largest text on the page and make that the heading 1. So I think that this is, there's so many challenges with all of this, but it can be very rewarding. And of course, hallucination, like this was literally, this was something that somebody had in a board packet that had to be described, and the text was too small at the time. And then you have to make sure that if you are using AI assisted models, that they have the ability to use a tool to zoom in and patch in text. So because if it's under the patch size for text, it won't work. So anyway, for those of you gearing up and And leaning in on the ADA tool or the AI-based tools, those are just things to consider. I know I saw some of those coming through chat.
Yeah.
So
quickly, Gordon, someone asked Gordon what tool he's using based on his experience. And then I know there's a ton more questions in the chat. We're trying to get through all of them.
Yeah, we've used several. We did use Site Improve. And then when we upgraded our CMS, the CMS was not compatible with Site Improve. Since then they've become, and we right now, as Mac said, we tried to do it on our own, quickly realized that we couldn't, and we have since partnered with Doc Access, brought them on board, and it's really made an amazing difference.
awesome. What other ones have come in, Annalise? Oh, this is great.
And there was a lot of questions too on the GIS mapping that have just come through in various formats. How do those, what do they need to do to make those compliant?
Here's my opinion on this. Like, this is literally, I think, the worst case I've ever seen. It's like, you get the PDF file where you zoom down to like the one page and it's 10 times the size of everything else. It makes everything else on the PDF like little thumbnails. So this was literally like 6 by 8 feet. If you were to try to print it, and it's really hard to read. So I think ideally, and I would be curious on your opinion on this, Carter. Like, sometimes you just get off the hook. You just say, hey, this is just a giant map. It can't be understood. In the WCAG standards, they often reference the anatomy of a hand as something that doesn't need to try to be described. But that, I don't know, that's not good enough for me. Like, I think we need to do better. I think we need to try to attempt to describe it. And I think AI can do a pretty great job of that. So in this case, there's the alt tag for the map that's at the bottom, but then there's really an alternative description that breaks down what is context for this document and what somebody would need to know. I know there's like the Auburn Cemetery one where we had the AI do like a block lot plot map to actually allow somebody with a visual disability to navigate to the gravesite if they wanted to. So I think you have to get creative and really try to leverage the technology to be more thorough. This is far beyond an alt tag, but this actually, I think, is a decent representation of the content.
And
Yeah,
those are,
I mean, a lot of cities have different, this is probably the most common question I get asked, at least with people trying to make their content accessible these days, just because there's so little guidance around it. I do know of a couple different companies who are working on solutions for this. I know the folks working at ArcGIS are also working on it quite a bit. What my biggest recommendation is in the meantime is just to provide a page with textual alternatives of what that map conveys, kind of like a guide. And the guide just kind of goes over where everything is located, what best practices are, and this is something that AI is actually very, very helpful with. You can't necessarily rely on your users doing this, but if you paste a map into ChatGPT or your friendly state-of-the-art AI agent, they can kind of help you around that map. For content creators, you can sort of use that to pick out details in the map and then start to build your text alternative. But more information on that is incoming and something that we're all kind of in the accessibility space waiting for updates on.
Mm-hmm. One thing too that we've done as a backstop is we added IRA in as just free service. So it's the same service that if you go to Whole Foods or Target and you need to find ripe bananas, but you can't see, you can patch them in on your phone and they will guide you through it. They have visual interpreters. And we built that service into our website and into Doc Access for just live assistance. So if there's just something that is not right with the PDF or with the document, they can basically get help from a human who will answer their specific question is like, would my house be on the river or would it be 3 feet off the river? That's not something that a summary can answer, but that's something that a visual interpreter could do. And I think the cost is actually very reasonable for that. I was really surprised at that it's money well spent, and it's a free way to get feedback, or not free, but it's an easy way to get feedback as a feedback loop, because IRA can give you a report on what people were struggling with from an accessibility standpoint. And I think the point of IRA is not for the things you can think of, it's for the things that you can't.
There's all the questions on the slide deck that are copied in from the chat. There we go. Some of these we might have answered along the way, but these are some of the ones I gathered.
Yeah, I just got one question that I kind of wanted to highlight for everyone still here. Like, what is the number one highest priority fix that we can make with minimal effort for everyone on our team? I would say that's probably get very familiar with the accessibility checkers that are built into Microsoft Word, PowerPoint, Excel, even Outlook. It's usually up in the toolbar. So whenever you get done writing a document, just run that accessibility checker and it'll kind of point out some of the things that you might want to look a little bit more closely at. It's not perfect, but it is a lot better than nothing. And if that's something that you can maybe call your team members and colleagues out on or show them how to use, a lot of these changes, accessibility seems like a lot in the beginning, but it's really just small changes and shifts over time that make all the difference. So thanks for asking that question. I figured I would just add input on that.
Yeah. Okay, I'm gonna just try to hammer through these pretty quickly. Also, what or how much detail is needed for the tags and the metadata? It's a sliding scale of good to great. I think great is what we try to show with those maps, like really getting into detail and explanation. At a minimum, you need to have a descriptive alt tag so that somebody knows at least what they're missing, so they know if they need to go get more information. Sometimes like telling them what they are missing is important. Like Carter earlier was like, I have no idea what those images are. Are they a graph? They're just decoration. They should have just been, empty alt tags for decoration. But that's just one of those things. So if he at least knows what it is, he could skip past it without having to worry. If your vendor doesn't have a VPAT or it has poor conformance, yeah, I mean, not ideal, right? And I think, Stuart, you would agree that could contribute to exposure.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there a place we can see some before and after examples, not ADA compliant, how it got fixed? Yeah, Sean Jordison has great examples. DocAccess.com has like the Hall of Fame of the most terrible documents that have been transcribed, and that's improving. I know there's going to be more examples there. Is there a practice or method of increasing accessibility while enhancing the experience for all? Yeah, I love that. And I think translation is actually a really important dimension to accessibility. Being able to ask questions in different languages. It's not technically under the ADA, but in any community, I mean, what a barrier, right? When people can't speak the language. So I think it's awesome when we can integrate live translation. And, IRA is also available in Spanish. That's a dimension of accessibility that I think is more for the moral reasons than that. And it's a way to bring communities together. So I think that's a practice or method that can have a win. And there are actually laws. Analysts at SB 707 or in California, that's going to require agendas be linked in all the major languages spoken in the county region.
Yeah, it's the top 3, and it starts taking effect, I believe, next year.
Yeah. So there may be more laws about multilingual access, and in today's day and age, there's some really great solutions. Is there a checklist for formatting PDFs? Absolutely. That video there, Sean Jordison, he's a hero when it comes to that stuff, and we're happy to follow up on those specifically. Oh, describing how to make things like headings properly. It's not just using bigger fonts. It's actually semantically saying this is a heading. And that's to allow Carter to be able to do what we do when we look at a page is we scan and we know what the headings are. But if it's a wall of text, somebody had asked earlier, well, what if it's just OCR? Is that good enough? It isn't, because an OCR is just one wall of flat text. If there's a 2,000 word document, how does Carter know what it's about? If Carter has 6 headings he can jump between, he can find that information. But if some people just make the font larger, that doesn't convey any meaning to a screen reader. So Sean's video walks this through, but that's why headings are there, because the headings and the heading order, so like the 1 and the 2 and 3, creates a kind of outline that can be used. So if you actually see like the outlines, the document outlines, often they just match the heading levels. So it's pretty cool, and it's very important. What are the limitations for alt text in images and graphics? Heard conflicting information on syntax, word character. I've heard that as well. The best practice we're following is to keep the alt text about the meaning of the image. It's like, adoption rate over time is increasing, especially in these categories. It's kind of like, what is the meaning of the image? And then adding a source table if possible, at least if you're transcribing to HTML. Otherwise, just trying to explain that. Carter, do you have any advice on that? If people are just doing alt tags, nobody uses the long description field, right? Like that's kind of out, so I understand.
Nah, no, not really. Kind of best practice is keep your alternative text no more than 180, 200 characters. Just describe the overall idea conveyed in the image. The trends are increasing from just it's ballpark. Like the trends are increasing from 50 to 55% over a 3-year period. That could work. And then if you find that you need more information, or more space to provide that information than what you're able to do in an alternative text description, usually it's indication that maybe we should throw in a table here or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And, we ran into this problem, Mac and I, a couple weeks ago. Why would you have an alternative text image description versus just a table? Well, if you're in a meeting or working on something and you quickly just need to know the trend, you're not going to look at the whole table to get the trend. You're going to look at the table when you want more specific information about something. So yeah, both are very useful in different contexts.
Mm-hmm. Like one humbling example we had is that like really complex pages would fail in sort of early alpha tests we were doing, and it would try to describe what they were missing and basically say like patch in IRA for help, which is not like a completely invalid response and failure because there is a reasonable accommodation, but it's kind of crappy for Carter to have this experience. So what we did, and this is kind of to answer the other question, well, what about captions? What about descriptions? What about alt text? Oh my gosh, lions, tigers, bears, like there's so many different things you have to worry about. So the practice that I've been leaning toward and using, and Carter and I are testing, is the alt text, the alt tag that gets to the point. This is a little longer than what Carter says is ideal. And then what we're using is just fig captions on the tables. Fig captions are like the real underrated thing. And this is just for your website as well with HTML. Carter does not know what a table is about unless it is labeled. And so fig captions are really handy for that. And so just trying to keep it, I think you don't need to get too carried away. Just good alt tags and make sure your headings are right. And if you do have a couple of tables, it can be a bonus, although not critical, to add a fig caption. In this case, the fig caption is this little text that says 3-year summary revenue budget by funds. It's helpful on a screen reader to anchor that. Is that right, Carter? Am I representing kind of your in your
yeah?
Okay,
you bet. And these things kind of come from the same vantage point, right? In the same way that we talk about heading structure is important, alternative text for kind of summaries is important. If I'm given 2 minutes to review something before a meeting, it's so useful to be able to have that general summary as opposed to spending 5 or 10 minutes to just read over all the data and come to my own conclusions. So, all these things intersect.
One of the other things I've seen was sort of annoying, and the city of Elk Grove pointed this out. Really phenomenal feedback. Was just like early AI tools will have the mistake of just labeling an image like a street with a stoplight undergoing maintenance, but it needs to take in the context of the document. So the point of the image is Elk Grove Boulevard with Measure X dollars at work renovating stoplights. And that's like where the human element, or in this case, trying to train the AI with document context and document meaning, and then bringing that into each page that's being processed. It's hard, but it's so much more meaningful when the pages are not just processed in isolation. So if you're using AI tools, I guess I could teach a class on all the ways that AI can go wrong because we've had a very humbling experience, dealing with these. But that's just something to look out for when you are using these tools. Just don't give a plain literal description, but try to incorporate the meaning of of the image. Cool. Okay. I know we got to knock through the rest of these. What would you do for images, for example, a planning commission pack? Yeah. Okay. I think we covered that. They're happy to go into more detail ad nauseum about that. What about applications received from external parties that are included in board or commissions? Do cities need to reformat an application to be ADA compliant? Yeah, that's a great one. What we've done on transcriptions for that is we've just recreated them as HTML fields and then made them disabled so they can't be changed, but they're represented in forms. But what do you think is best practice? Like, Carter, you lead the usability testing groups for PDF remediation, work with Sean and so forth. Like, what do you do for those? What would you recommend?
For just, are you talking about forms that we're looking at that like requesting user information and
They're not requesting that. It would be like a application to run for office for the board members, and it's included later as kind of a record of how they filled out that form.
Yeah. So if we're talking about just what are the best practices for making that form accessible, so what you really want to do with that is just make sure that all of the form fields are like located together, the ones that are related, that the labels themselves are properly associated with the fields, so that they are read out. And you can actually test this with built-in screen readers on Windows. There's Narrator, Control Windows Enter. On Mac OS, there's VoiceOver. Just going through those fields and making sure that you know what each of them refer to is probably like the easiest way to guarantee that you're making a form that makes sense. Sorry, did that answer the question?
Yeah, I think so. And
Awesome.
If you'd like to email me, my email will be at the next slide. Happy to work with you on any specifics and an approach for that. And Sean Jordison as well is specific to PDF. I mean, he's amazing and has encountered this many times. I'd love his opinion too. And you'll get different opinions from each of us. There's not always a consensus too.
Yeah, we've got a good thing going. If you kind of email Mac with questions about something that you're looking at, I can kind of provide my perspective on what's broken, and then Sean just comes in to fix everything at the end of the day. So definitely don't hesitate to reach out. We're always happy to look at stuff, comment on stuff, and provide recommendations.
In lieu of all the recreation of PDFs to make them accessible, is it possible to create audio presentations offered aside of PDFs to satisfy requirements? Would that be an alternative format? Thoughts, Carter and or Stuart, on that one?
Yeah, I can take this. I mean, from a legal perspective, it wouldn't meet ADA requirements to just, create an audio version and release that to the public. It wouldn't have the same usability that a properly formatted PDF, or better yet, HTML option would have. It's a bit like saying, uh, instead of the dictionary where you can go through and just skim or go to the actual word or section that you want, I'm just going to give you an audio tape and you can listen to the whole thing. It doesn't offer the same usability to people. And I'm sure Carter would agree that rather than having a hour-long audio MP3 file, he'd much rather have HTML file that he can, dissect and go through and skip sections of.
Yeah, that's totally true. And I'm glad you brought up multimedia, kind of piggybacking off that. Another thing that I would add, in the past, it was really difficult for us to generate transcripts and captions and things like that. And it was understandable when someone would say, well, I just don't have the time or the money. Nowadays, it's completely free. I keep bringing up AI because there's a lot of ways. This is probably the most common one that it'll help you out. If you just do some verification, making sure that it makes sense, you can get AI to generate you an HTML transcript separated by headings pretty easily. So that's always an option. And even for the users that you have that don't want to just watch an hour-long video or presentation, maybe like this one, that just want information about something. Well, now they can open the transcripts, they can use their Find dialog, and they can type in anything they want and get information about that really quickly and then continue on with their day. So it's a really good practice if your organization or municipality does allow you to use artificial intelligence. Definitely be experimenting with how you can generate transcripts and captions from that.
Two things to bear in mind if you're using AI. One is to look at model safety and training privacy. So I know we ended up needing to be pretty conservative about this because you can get 20% off your AI charges basically if you allow training on the data. We opted not to, so we pay more for it. Unfortunately, that gets passed along, but it's kind of this thing where we have healthcare districts and people ask questions about their medical conditions, and we just don't want any risk that like there's training off of that. It's kind of a shame in a way because there's so much good data out there, but we just are kind of taking that line. It makes people happy to know that there's no training off of it. And then the other thing is just making sure that if you have a question and answer functionality built in, that you're aware of like CCPA and GDPR and like all the privacy around that. Don't store IP addresses with the questions. Make sure there's a disclosure if you're using a third party to process it. And lastly, this came up with around Google Translate. We actually disabled Google Translate unless the Google Translate button is clicked to activate translation, because Google Translate drops a cookie on their on the browser, and maybe they didn't want that, or maybe they don't want ads. Like if they're reading something about a medical condition or some other things came up again with a healthcare district, they don't want to see ads about that. And technically, like it's possible with Google just automatically dropping a cookie just by having the Google Translate dropdown available on a page could have privacy implications. So we just try to be really conservative there in terms of the user experience. Obviously, you need these services to process the information. It's a benefit, but only if they really opt into it. And then we're holding off on training until there's more standards established.
Great point.
There's some raised hands. I want to make sure those, if they're raised to ask a question, I'll unmute you. If you're raised just by accident, you can put it down. So I won't unmute you. Okay. Amy, Heckart, and Jess, would you like to, or I'll allow you to talk if you want to ask a live question. Feel free to just jump in. Otherwise, Annalise, anything else on the question board that I don't know how we, I don't know where we are in this big list.
There's one that came in the Q&A that I sent a quick response to, but I'm curious, others probably the same question, maybe Stuart's input on this. The question is, in September, the DOJ released their semi-annual regulatory agenda, which indicated that they will be reviewing the April 2024 web accessibility rule. Does anyone have insight as to what they are planning to review and what potential changes might be coming?
Oh, great question. Stuart.
I am always trying to read the tea leaves of what the Department of Justice is doing. And, I get whispers and I have some contacts at the DOJ. So, as for this specific question, I don't know exactly what they're going to do. I think they're going to review these requirements. Will they make changes? Possibly, but probably not because, a lot of the basic rules at least are already in place and have been contemplated for a long time. So I certainly wouldn't be holding my breath for any major changes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and even if the DOJ doesn't enforce, it doesn't stop people from doing private party enforcement directly, right? Like that's how you had explained it to us, like in Oregon. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, that's right. The ADA is still in place. It's congressionally passed law signed by the president, and so the DOJ wouldn't have authority to overturn that. So
yeah, it's kind of like the Office of Civil Rights and the Department of Education, like they send OCR letters to educate higher ed and school districts all the time. The dreaded OCR letter, but that's like just its own enforcement vehicle, right? Yeah, I would expect maybe, some enforcement or something, but who knows? Anything's possible.
Mm-hmm.
All right, Annalise, any other ones?
I think we covered most of them. Feel free. I tried to capture everyone's. I'm sorry if I missed yours. If there's one that you have pressing, feel free to send it in the chat. But I think we covered a majority of them.
Awesome. Well, I want to acknowledge everybody. I'll put up our contact information, and we'll send out everyone's contact information as well in the follow-up, as well as the recording. But I just want to thank you for joining today. You've taken actually far more than an hour and a half of your day for a 1-hour webinar about accessibility. And we're excited to be here today because we care about democracy. That's why I work in local government, not just for the great money, as you would imagine, but really for the opportunity to kind of give back to the most local forms of government and to where people organize. And communication is fundamental for democracy to work. And accessibility is important and essential for civil rights reasons. And when you take those two together, we believe that technology can unlock the power of both values, that you can be transparent and accessible, and that it can give you your life back. So you're not just foaming at the mouth for mediating PDFs all day, trying to get the table errors to go away between pages. We've done it, it's terrible. And no matter what method it is, whether you're doing it yourself, whether you're using contractors, or whether you're plugging in new technology, or all of the above, we hope that technology can serve a role in improving the quality of life for you, for your community members, and allow you to communicate the great works you're doing. At the end of the day, you're the heart of democracy. And if there's any way we can make that easier, any way we can come together to ensure that every single person in your community can understand your mission, then we'll consider that a success. We want to thank the National League of Cities for putting on this important topic. And I hope that you'll continue to join us as we explore this conversation, work hard on these problems to do a better job. Thank you. And we hope to see you at the next webinar and at the annual conference. Take care.